But, ambition and authority only get you through the front gates. Once you're inside, you actually have to perform these horrific, intimate acts of violence and then, like we said, go sit in the cafeteria and eat a sandwich.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
How does the human brain allow a person to do that without completely breaking down?
It requires the active systemic creation of psychological distance. If you view the person in front of you as a fellow human being, your brain's empathy centers, specifically the medial prefrontal cortex, will trigger feelings of distress and guilt.
So they had to bypass that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To bypass that biological response, the doctors had to rewire how they categorize their victims. And they did this, starting with the very language they used.
The vocabulary of dehumanization.
Yeah.
I mean, they completely banned referring to the victims as people. They classified them as Maruda, which translates directly to logs. They even called the women's holding cells log cabins.
And it extended to the entire logistics chain.
Right.
The rail administrators who coordinated the trains bringing in the victims, who were mostly Chinese citizens, but also Russian, Korean, and Allied prisoners of war, they knew exactly who was in those windowless train cars.
But they didn't write people on the manifests.
No, they processed the intake paperwork under the official label Miscellaneous Biological Materials.
Wow. And when a horrific dissection took place, it was logged in the books as consumption. When a person was finally killed, the death certificate simply read disposed of.
Just completely erased.
The moment a victim arrived at the facility, they were stripped of their name and assigned a 3-digit inventory number. It really makes me think about how we interact with massive data sets today.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
If you look at a spreadsheet with 1,000 rows, you don't feel an emotional connection to row 412. By reducing a living, breathing person to a label, a number, or just biological material, the doctors were literally starving their brain's empathy centers of the cues needed to feel compassion.
Yeah.
It's like a dark UI trick for the human conscience. You change the interface, you change the emotional response.
And that UI trick is the ultimate tool for a professional who needs to sleep at night. You systematically erase the humanity of your subject before you ever make the first incision. If it's just a log, there is no moral weight to cutting.
Right.
But the sources contain a deeply profound story that completely shatters that illusion of distance. And it comes from an account by a medical technician named Nata Ishibashi.
Right, the mirror story. This one is incredibly heavy, but it illustrates exactly what we're talking about.
It does.
So Ishibashi is working in the facility, surrounded by all this clinical detachment, and he is approached by 2 young female prisoners. One is a 21-year-old Chinese girl, and the other is a 19-year-old Ukrainian girl.
And they've been there a while.
Yeah, they've been subjected to the absolute horrors of this place for weeks. We are talking severe malnutrition, physical terror, the worst environment imaginable, and they beg Ishibashi for a favor.
But not what you think.
No, they don't ask him to help them escape, and they don't ask for food. They ask if he could just lend them a small mirror.
Because they hadn't seen their own faces since they were imprisoned.
Right.
In an environment completely designed to strip away every ounce of their identity, they just wanted to know if they would still be able to recognize themselves.
It's the most heartbreakingly human request possible. It cuts right through the sterile spreadsheets, the 3-digit inventory numbers, and the Maruda labels. It's a reminder of the soul underneath.
Yeah.
Ishibashi actually risks severe military punishment, but he manages to sneak a mirror through a hole in their cell door so they can look at themselves.
But the ending of that story.
Yeah, the sources note the tragic end to this brief moment of humanity. Shortly after this happens, Ishibashi overhears colleagues discussing an upcoming experiment. Both of those young women had been taken, and they were vivisected.
And the contrast in that event is staggering. It highlights the fragile nature of their psychological walls. You have the horrific, systemic, clinical dehumanization enforced by the doctors, clashing violently with this deeply poignant desire of 2 girls who just wanted to remember their own faces.
And we should clarify for the listener, when we say vivisection, we are talking about surgeries conducted while the subject is still alive, usually without any anesthesia, specifically to observe live biological processes. It is the absolute pinnacle of medical cruelty.
Which is exactly why the doctors had to rigorously enforce that psychological distance. If they allowed themselves to see those girls not as logs, but as terrified 19 and 21-year-olds who just wanted to look in a mirror, the entire moral facade of the facility would collapse.
The system would just break.
Exactly. Empathy would flood the system and the work would grind to a halt.
Because once you've successfully muted your own empathy, the actual work begins. And to me, this is where the psychology gets the most terrifying.
How so?
These doctors didn't view themselves as sadists inflicting pain for fun. They genuinely, deeply felt their actions were scientifically justified.
And this is the third psychological trigger, justification. We've seen authority give them permission, we've seen distance numb their empathy, and now we arrive at the intellectual rationalization.
Right.
They convinced themselves they needed actionable data for the broader war effort.
Let's look at how that played out with the frostbite experiments, right? They would march prisoners, sometimes entire families, out into the brutal negative 40-degree Fahrenheit Manchurian winters.
Awful.
They would force them to soak their bare arms and legs in freezing water until they were completely solid. The doctors would literally hit the frozen limbs with sticks, listening to see if they sounded like a solid plank of wood being struck.
Just incredibly brutal.
And once they confirmed the tissue was frozen through, they would test different methods of rapid thawing, often by dunking the limbs into warm water, meticulously studying how fast the flesh would rot off the bone.
The sheer brutality of it is overwhelming, but we really have to look at how they rationalized it.
Right, the justification.
They told themselves it was an absolute necessity. Japanese soldiers fighting in the freezing conditions of Siberia and northern China were dying by the thousands from hypothermia and severe frostbite.
So they needed a solution.
Yes, the doctors at Unit 731 convinced themselves that by sacrificing these logs, they were gathering the precise medical data needed to save the lives of their own troops.
And they applied the exact same logic to their aviation research, too.
Right, the pressure chambers.
Yeah, they built massive custom pressure chambers equipped with reinforced glass viewing ports. They would lock people inside, and the sources note they often used children because their bodies deformed more dramatically, or pregnant women.
Yeah.
And they would slowly increase the pressure to test exactly how much atmospheric change a human body could take before the eyes expanded and the lungs physically collapsed.
Horrific.
And the justification was simply, well, we are developing high-altitude flight protocols to keep our fighter pilots safe.
And they approached these horrific events with immaculate, pristine scientific methodology. They recorded the exact second a subject started screaming, the exact minute their breathing became irregular.
Just writing it all down.
Charting heart rates and biological failures with the same dispassionate, emotional investment that a meteorologist might use to record the daily rainfall.
Okay, hold on. I really have to jump in here because this part just completely breaks my brain.
Yeah.
If they are committing these unspeakable acts against prisoners of war and civilians, surely this was a highly classified, dark secret, right? Wouldn't the global medical community immediately flag the ethical violations if they found out?
Well, you would think so, but they didn't hide the data in a vault. They actively published their findings in highly respected, peer-reviewed medical journals.
Wait, publicly?
Yes, the scientific community operates on a certain level of trust regarding methodology. The researchers at Unit 731 manipulated that trust by publishing sanitized versions of their papers.
How did they explain the data?
They simply claimed that these groundbreaking, incredibly detailed experiments were conducted on Manchurian monkeys or long-tailed primates.
Oh, wow. So they were standing at podiums, presenting this data at medical conferences.
Yes, and receiving applause for their rigorous findings. They felt they had achieved monumental scientific breakthroughs.
That is insane.
This is the ultimate danger of justification. When you tell yourself, well, this cruelty will save our soldiers' lives tomorrow, or this data will serve the greater good of the empire, you successfully replace the Hippocratic Oath with cold clinical efficiency.
Right.
The data became the only thing that mattered, and the suffering was just the cost of doing business.
You know, it is so incredibly easy to listen to this deep dive and think of it purely as ancient history. It's comfortable to just put it in a neat little box labeled World War II monsters and completely detach it from the reality of your own life.
Oh, we do that instinctively. It is a psychological defense mechanism to distance ourselves from the capacity for that kind of darkness.
But the underlying psychology we've been unpacking here, the exact mechanisms that compromise these brilliant, educated minds, it's a universal human flaw. Think about your own professional life, you know? Have you ever agreed to push a project forward that you didn't fully believe in? Have you ever looked the other way when a company policy felt ethically wrong, just because a boss or a manager or some authority figure told you it mattered for the quarterly goals?
It happens all the time.
You don't need a global war to lose your humanity. You just need enough comfort and ambition to stop questioning the systems that you are a part of.
And that leaves us with a deeply unsettling thought to consider long after we've finished this discussion.
Yeah.
Evil almost never wears a warning label. It doesn't announce itself with thunder and lightning or cartoonish villains. At the start, it doesn't even feel evil.
No.
It feels logical. It feels efficient.
Yeah.
And worst of all, it feels necessary. When we look at the massive modern institutions we interact with every single day, from corporate data harvesting operations that reduce our entire lives to algorithms to massive automated bureaucracies that decide who gets financial help and who doesn't, we have to look closely and ask ourselves, who are the logs in our current systems? And have we already forgotten how to see their faces?
Man, that is a heavy question, but it's exactly why we dig into these sources. Understanding how the line disappears is the only way we keep from crossing it ourselves.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this really difficult but absolutely vital deep dive today. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll catch you on the next one.